this is Marilyn on the Buying Space channel. I've decided to share that I'm diabetic, and I've been diabetic off and on for 20 years. And what I mean by off and on is I had gestational diabetes. So when I was pregnant, I had diabetes. And then after I had my baby, I was not diabetic for 7-8 years after I had my daughter. So they say if you have a diabetes when you are pregnant, that it comes back later, and it's almost a guarantee that you're going to be diabetic. Now, one of the things you need when you're diabetic and you're on insulin is you need a sharps container to put your needles and your syringes. These are an example of a syringe. This is a syringe, and also if you use pins, you will need pin needles. So if you use a vial, you need syringes, and if you use pin needles, you need pins. I'll show you in another session, I'll show you the vials that you use for your insulin. Normally, there's 2 types of insulin you will take, long-term and short-term. Now this pattern material, cardboard, is from a tissue box. So it's almost the exact size on this crease for the height of this cashew tin. So instead of getting the very hard plastic sharps containers, we use recycled materials for our sharps containers, and it's fine as long as what you're using is solid enough to prevent the needle from poking through. So it's a very sturdy container, and what you do is you poke a hole in the top of this and put it on here, and then you can just drop your pin needles or your syringes down in here. But you don't want just old food containers sitting around. So I decorate my sharps containers sometimes. I was in the hospital for 7 weeks this year, and when I got out, my daughter and I stayed with family for a couple weeks after I got out because I wasn't ready for us to go home and be alone. And she was, her sharps container had filled up, and the people she's staying with hadn't noticed. So I took a nut container and did this very thing, and I used tissue boxes that I had gotten from the hospital to make this for her. And even though it was something that was homemade and for diabetic waste, it just touched her heart that I made that for her while I was sitting in the other room. I was barely able to walk at that point, and I was being cheated out of physical therapy by the hospital. So, but anyway, I did go home within the 2-week period we were supposed to stay with relatives, even though I didn't have physical therapy or a wheelchair ramp at my home. And it was a difficult time for both of us. So she had a greater appreciation for the simpler things in life at that time. So you just tape the tissue box on the outside using all the parts that you have. There have been other times that I've used this area of the tissue box to, which is where the tissue comes out, for a picture frame. But today, the other piece was not enough to completely wrap the tissue box, so we're making strips to go across there to cover the remainder. Now, it varies a great deal how you dispose of your medical waste from being diabetic. Ask your doctor's office, but it mainly varies by your municipality or the county you live in. I'm very not pleased with the county I live in right now about diabetic waste, but that is a very, very long story. So I will not go into that today. I'm just going to finish making this homemade sharps container, and then I'll see you another time to talk about other issues with having diabetes. I'm not a medical professional, and you should ask your doctor's office about anything I recommend. So consider everything I say as opinion from someone with 20 years experience with diabetes. And put anything that you have questions about on the list that you should make when you go to the doctor's office of all the questions you have. Diabetic educators are usually in your doctor's office, and my experience is that you can call a diabetic educator when you can't reach your doctor. So this will sit around, and it won't look like trash because you've wrapped it in this nice tissue box pattern. It's better than having it sit around being an empty cashew container. Okay. Well, X marks the spot where I will cut with a real knife, and you can just bend in these 4 sections after they're cut with a real knife, and be careful when you do this. I just marked how I would normally do this so you can see. And then once you get done with your syringe, you can put it down in here. Now this syringe is about just the height after you remove this of this container. It's not real good container for this. We also use these milk containers. And now these are great for recycling. You can cut them in half and make candles in them. Just, you know, like you have been able to since the 50s with the old-fashioned milk cartons. But once you take this, you're out of milk, rinse this out a couple of times, and then set it around for a week without the cap on it. And if it doesn't smell, you can go ahead and use it. If it does smell, rinse it again and set it, you know, around to where it evaporates again. And then after it doesn't smell anymore, these syringes will just go right down in here. Sharps containers, test strips with your blood on them. You know, all of your diabetic waste. I haven't decorated one of these yet. We have just kind of let these sit around, but people aren't going to come up in your home and try to drink milk out of a milk carton that's not refrigerated. We had an incident where my mother came up and we had a container like this that was candy on the outside, and she came up and it was full of needles, and she came up to take a piece of candy out, and we all were like, don't touch that, you know. So I always cover these because people might pick this up and think it's cashews to eat. So that's very hazardous. So we don't do that anymore. But this is how I do diabetes waste without having to buy the Sharps containers, because it's not covered by insurance. And these are sturdy enough that the needles do not break through. And there's more, but I will cover it in another video. If you have a topic about diabetes you'd like me to talk about, please put it in the comments. I'm going to do probably at least 5 days of diabetic awareness and education. Have a wonderful day, everyone.